Looking good, Gus.
Looking good, Ashley.
Shout out to our sponsor, Diff Eyewear.
You can have serious style without a serious price tag. Diff Eyewear offers handmade sunglasses constructed from high-end materials.
For those days when your present is so bright, you gotta wear shades. How many people do you think will get that reference?
Very few, very few.
You can get 15% off your first purchase when you go to diffeyewear.com/no. Welcome to The Know. I'm Ashley Jenkins.
And I'm Gus Sorola.
Screw your informed purchasing decisions, gamers. Bethesda's kicked the hornet's nest with a new blog post announcing that they will no longer be sending early copies of their games out for review.
This caps off a string of recent releases that also didn't allow reviewers to get early access. Now, we've got a discussion on our hands about whether or not video game reviews are dying, whether it's ethical to hold games for review, and what happens if more publishers start following suit.
And what a discussion it is.
Yes.
Before we dig into, pretty much every side of this extremely complicated issue, let's take a look at the blog post that started it all. Yesterday, Bethesda Global Content Lead Gary Steinman updated the Bethesda blog with a post titled Bethesda and Game Reviews. In the post, Steinman assured the internet that the folks at Bethesda value media reviews.
And they value them so much, they're going to stop supplying reviewers with early copies. I mean, that's value.
That's a lot.
That's the definition of value.
How else do you show love?
After reminding us that Bethesda waited until a day before the release of Doom to send out review editions, the game went on to become a critical and commercial success. Steinman wrote, "With the upcoming launches of Skyrim Special Edition and Dishonored 2, we will continue our policy of sending media review copies one day before release."
The post then went on to say, while we will continue to work with media, streamers, and YouTubers to support their coverage both before and after release, we want everyone, including those in the media, to experience our games at the same time.
Lest you think Bethesda is doing this so they can trick you into buying a game before you know if it's good or bad, the post has you covered. Quote,
Sort of.
"We also understand that some of you want to read reviews before you make your decision, and if that's the case, we encourage you to wait for your favorite reviewers to share their thoughts." End quote. So they don't want everyone to experience the game at the same time? I'm confused.
So many have noted that a number of Let's Players and streamers already have access to Skyrim Special Edition. YouTubers like Rovana, Gassy Mexican, and others had it a week before the game's launch this Friday.
I might want to disclose that I actually did receive a copy of Skyrim while I was out of town last week. I haven't played it yet because I've been out of town, but I do have a physical copy of that game sitting on my desk.
Kinda jealous.
So this news was a little shocking to me. So naturally, there's been a pretty huge reaction from both the gaming press and gamers who are calling out this move for a multitude of reasons with varying degree of hyperbole. Some bloggers have gone as far as saying they'll no longer be covering Bethesda games at all, accusing Bethesda of trying to control what the media says about their games.
They're also arguing that this is going to lead to rushed video game reviews, with writers scrambling to finish games in time to have reviews ready for the day of launch in order to better service their readers. That concern is especially heavy with Dishonored 2, which Bethesda has indicated will require 2 playthroughs to fully appreciate.
Well, I'm not going to fully appreciate that game then.
Me neither.
Meanwhile, some gamers are accusing Bethesda and others who engage in this practice of trying to keep their games out of the public eye. Bethesda in particular has developed a bit of a reputation for buggy games.
Love their games, but yeah, they're buggy.
And now some are wondering if this is the company's way of hiding that Dishonored 2 and Skyrim Special Edition might ship with fairly serious flaws.
So those are the complaints that are being hurled at Bethesda right now. But does limiting review copies mean that they're trying to hide a bad game? That's not necessarily the case here.
Yes, sometimes publishers hold back review copies or set tight embargoes because they know that a game might strike out critically, and if they can keep people from seeing bad reviews before the game's out, they might see a few more sales.
I mean, that's kind of what Ubisoft did with Assassin's Creed Unity, where the embargo lifted after the game was commercially available.
I forgot about that.
It's like a 12-hour gap, but still, they wanted people to be able to buy it before they could get their reviews.
Yeah, and then more recently, we saw with Mafia 3 and No Man's Sky, who both got dinged pretty hard by critics after the games were already out.
However, sometimes publishers do this even when a game goes on to critical and commercial success. We already talked about Doom, which went on to sell 3 million copies across all platforms and netted Metacritic scores in the mid to high 80s, which is great.
Yeah. But they're not the only ones, because 2K did the same with Civilization 6 last week. We don't know sales figures yet, but its concurrent player numbers put it in the top 5 PC launches of this year, and now that reviews are finally out, it's holding in the 90s on Metacritic.
So while hiding a bad game is sometimes the reason for delaying a review, it's not the only reason. But whether or not the game is good or bad, one thing seems pretty clear from the publisher's point of view, and it's why Bethesda and others are starting to do this. Game reviews don't seem to matter anymore, at least not in the way that publishers want them to matter, which is for generating day one sales.
And there's even some research that supports this. Last year, the ESA released a report claiming that only 3% of gamers use reviews to make purchasing decisions, while 11% relied on word of mouth.
Yeah, the research seems to indicate that people generally don't use reviews to decide if they want to buy a game, but rather as kind of a form of confirmation bias. I'm going to purchase this game and I want to make sure it holds true to my expectations, or I've already decided I'm not going to buy this game, so I want to make sure the reviews are as bad as I think they're going to be.
But the opposite seems to be true with YouTuber and streamer coverage. A study from earlier this year showed that as much as 35% of the 500 million gamers who watch content online use YouTube to hear about new purchases.
So that means publishers are starting to identify day one reviews as not beneficial to their business model regardless of the game's quality. We saw the same thing happen with video game demos, which have gone the way of the dodo bird. Now the research indicates they can cut game sales by as much as 50%.
Ouch.
You say, why aren't they around? That's why.
Yeah, that's a lot of percent. Generally, pre-orders and day one sales are the big drivers of whether or not a game is going to succeed financially. The video game sales timeline is front-loaded with the majority of sales happening at a game's launch. That's why publishers are constantly pushing pre-order bonuses to get you in the door on day one. Big numbers impress shareholders, and they also impress gamers who are more likely to hop on the early bandwagon so they don't feel left behind. FOMO.
To be clear, we're not excusing Bethesda's attempts to manipulate the system here, and giving the game out to enthusiasts rather than critics is definitely an attempt to do that, but it makes sense from a business standpoint. And that's what they are. They're not your buddy, they're not in it for the passion or to the exclusion of everything else. There are very passionate people working on games, and then there are the business people who want to keep the doors open so they can keep making games. I mean, they're a business, and they're gonna do whatever it takes to get them an advantage in the market.
Absolutely. There's almost no benefit for them at all to give their game out early to people whose job it is to tear it apart critically. It's definitely trying to stack the odds in their favor. It really is a responsibility of consumers to wait for reviews instead of buying on day one if they have doubts. Game companies aren't your mom, they're just trying to sell their game, which is why they exist.
But of course, there's the question of whether or not this is ethical or helpful to gamers. We've already mentioned the complaints people have about this leading to rushed reviews, or it means that Bethesda is trying to control or censor the media.
However, these review outlets and publishers aren't exactly being forthright either. Yes, they want to service their readers, but they also want day one traffic with reviews out ahead of the game. Part of their business model depends on it, so now they're rushing reviews not because of those poor consumers who desperately need their guidance, but because they also want early eyeballs because that's where they make their own money. They're also a business.
Right, yeah, everyone's businesses at this point.
Yeah,
even honestly, the YouTubers and the entertainers and the Let's Players, they're also a business. They're in the business of entertainment rather than critical review, which is kind of where the shift is.
This right here?
Yeah.
Business.
Really, it all comes down to day one, with each group hoping to get the most bang for their buck. And that includes gamers, that's all of us who stand to be hurt the most by this potentially, especially gamers who want to be part of day one. But it might be time for the sales timeline to change.
We've said it over and over, but more and more problems would be solved for gamers if they stopped pre-ordering before a game is even out, or if they waited a few weeks before making their decisions. And to Bethesda's credit, they even encourage people to do that in their post.
I'll sort of encourage.
Maybe a bit disingenuous because they don't want you to do that. They want you to buy the game because you saw it in a Let's Play and it looked like someone was having fun. But at least they're honest that you should wait to buy if the review is important to you.
Yeah, so what it comes down to is Bethesda and others are doing this because they can. They've identified reviews as not helping their bottom line because it seems that gamers are going to pay money regardless of whether or not the game turns out to be bad on day one. But if gamers change their purchasing habits, the publishers would have to change to follow suit.
The truth is that gamers have all the power here, not publishers and developers. It's why they're increasingly going directly to gamers instead of relying on the press, and why they rely on influencers gamers trust rather than reviewers, because that's where gamers have already turned.
So in the end, yeah, this is a move by Bethesda and others to control the conversation around new releases. That's their job. And yes, sometimes it can be because a game is bad, but mostly it's because they figure they don't need early reviews anymore to get your money. And if you want that to change, it is time to, once again, vote with your wallet.
Wallet's out.
Right there.
What do you guys think of Bethesda's decision to stop sending out review copies? Let us know in the comments.
And for future updates on the surprisingly contentious world of video game reviews, like this video and subscribe to The Know.
I feel like pre-orders were more important and a bigger deal before digital delivery.
I agree, because pre-orders determined how many copies of something a retailer would order in. Like they would say, we've got this many pre-orders, so we'll order this many extra copies for people who didn't pre-order.
And I never pre-ordered physical copies, so I was always one of the people who would go to the store day one and be like, oh, you don't, no, I would try. But sometimes it would be like, oh, they don't have any. They've got a stack of them for the pre-order people, but not for me, who just wants to walk in. But now I can just download games. It's totally different. You don't have to pre-order.
Like the worst you get there is a log jam trying to download.
You end up waiting a couple hours in your pajamas. at midnight.
That's a pain in the ass.
Thanks to Diff Eyewear for sponsoring this update.
Do good, buy smart, be Diff.
Diff offers handmade sunglasses made from high-end materials without the high-end price. Instead, sunglasses start at $50, and for every pair sold, to keep you looking good, they donate a pair of reading glasses for those in need.
For the blind people like us who need glasses or contacts. Like you need glasses. You could be helping a Gus in need. And so you can look good and you can feel good. Plus, you can get 15% off your first pair of sunglasses by going to diffeyewear.com/no.
Don't go to diffewear.com. It's a totally different website.
No, Diff Eyewear. Yeah, make sure that you go to the right place.